Hi there, welcome to the video and welcome back to return viewers, and hello there. It's the 27th of June 2026. It's probably at least a month since I've put a video up by the time this one goes up. Just need to give a little explanation. Well, I was going to go into a lot of detail, but basically the gist of it is that I kind of lost my inspiration for making these videos. That became a bit of a drag trying to get myself to do them. The last two ones I put up, the art thief and chasing aliens, felt kind of painful to put out, like I was forcing an issue, and they were kind of out of sequence from what I had read. I kind of clutched at low-hanging fruit to get a couple of videos out, just to say I had, and yeah, that kind of epitomizes my feeling towards doing YouTube over the last month or so. I kind of lost the feeling of joy and the joy of creating something and putting it out into the world. So I've kind of spent the last month pondering whether I wanted to keep doing this. So the book haul videos, the May one and probably the June one are not happening, basically. I kind of haven't had the enthusiasm to basically sit here and go through a whole lot of books. There's kind of the issue of, am I putting myself in the world as some fool that spends all his money on books or whatever? Just wasn't happening, and it just hasn't been happening for me. Since those last two videos, I actually went on a very short vacation. I went to Queenstown, which for the uninitiated is a town in the central Otago region of New Zealand's South Island. It is located in a mountainous valley at the head of a rather large lake, similar to a Scottish loch. The lake there is Lake Wakatipu. Queenstown itself has become something of a tourist mecca. It always was. I think it was founded about 160 something years ago, and it's always been like a destination for travellers for the sights. But in the last 40-50 years, it's become like a high-end tourist resort for the rich and famous, and prices, etc., have kind of reflected that. It is still you can still get there for a reasonable price. I did not pay a lot of money to go there for my 2 days. I stayed at like a 1970s vintage hotel partway out of town, and yeah, so I wish I could say I enjoyed it more, but I had some pretty bad weather. I was hoping for those kind of crisp, clear, early winter days with blue skies and snow on the mountain peaks, and what I got was a lot of fog and rain and murkiness. I didn't really partake in any of the big tourist activities there either, which is probably down to my problem, not the town. So I basically followed the herd. Basically, the tourists there seem to walk in packs around the town centre, visiting the various shops. Now it's kind of a mix of all the chain stores that you'd see in other large towns, plus kind of idiosyncratic little weird shops which are kind of unique to Queenstown. It's pretty much like a open street mall of any other town, but in a kind of a picturesque mountain location. Of course, there are things that you can do there, like the gondola and boat trips and what have you. I didn't do a lot of that, and as a result, I probably wasted my time there. I was kind of in mixed feelings about it. I kind of never quite relaxed there. I was always wondering where I was going to go for the next meal or to get back to the airport and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's probably my fault, my frame of mind, and yeah. I will drop some footage into the video if you haven't already spotted it, since I started talking. I don't know if it's my generation or whatever. I just didn't do a lot of videoing for making videos of the experience, just a few there. And yeah, and of course, being a long-time aviation buff, aviation freak into those planes, the actual flying there and back was, is equally as exciting or enjoyable as the actual stay there. There's something about flight which still is magical to me. The many years I didn't do it an awful lot, and in the last year I've probably flown half a dozen times. So yeah, it's something I enjoy. You hear these people saying, "Oh, flight, the terrible experience," but I enjoy it. Especially when you get a window seat, and it's something special about that view, that motion. Part I don't like is all the hassle beforehand, where you worry about getting to the airport on time and what have you, and then have to end up waiting for something to happen. But flight itself is still a great experience to me. So I had a mix of that and going to an exotic location. Yes, I could have made better use of my time, but yeah, it was a vacation, a move away, and since then I have come back to my job and my life, and there are changes in medical stuff. There has been work stress. Haven't quite fitted back in since I returned. I mean, that was only a 2-day holiday. Well, God help me if I go on something longer sometime. Anyway, as part of returning to normality, I have decided to make a new video, and I have sat on my hands for the last month or so, there's quite a backlog of books. I have still been reading books. That's kind of the thing I wanted to do, really, when I stopped making videos. I just kind of wanted to get back into the enjoyment of making books. For reading books. For a long time, I was kind of, the video making stuff was pushing me forward on what I was reading, or when I was reading, or trying to finish things, and that kind of sapped a bit of the enjoyment out of it still. So I've read a number of books in the last month or so, or month or two really, since haven't been making videos. So over the last week or so, and I'm still continuing to do this probably today or tomorrow, I've been filming small snippets, reviews of the various books that I've completed recently. It's a bit rough and ready. I'm still getting to grips with this camera. I did take it with me to Queenstown, as you might have seen from those clips, and I'm not an expert at it, but it is a very capable machine in the right hands, maybe not mine. So anyway, I've been filming bits and pieces of a video, and I still have 2 books to film, maybe do this today or tomorrow, and then I'll try and cobble it all together into some type of coherent whole. So I just wanted to give that kind of introduction, and hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Cheers. Now we come to this book, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, the very famous UK author. This is a very famous book. It's very well known. It's very well received and read. It won the Booker Prize in 1989. It was made into a very famous movie in the early 90s, starring leading actors of the UK, Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. I don't really need to say a lot about this book, except for it is really, really good, and if your only exposure to the story has been the movie, you are missing out a tour de force of writing, basically. Ishiguro is a master at his craft. What else can I say? So it's about Stevens, a butler or manservant who's worked for decades at a estate called Darlington Hall. In the 1920s and 30s, he worked for a Lord Darlington who owned the property. The book opens 20 odd years later in the 1950s, and Stevens has a new employer, Mr. Faraday, who's a nouveau rich American who has taken over the property Darlington Hall from Lord Darlington, who we discover has died. And Faraday basically invites Stevens to take a break and use Faraday's motor vehicle, it's referred to as the Ford, to travel and sightsee. And Stevens, this coincides with a renewed contact with one of the former co-workers at Darlington Hall, who he knew as Miss Stevens, who was like the housekeeper there. And he plans to travel partway across the UK to visit Miss Stevens, although she has a new name now. She has become married. She married to a couple of decades ago, after leaving employment at Darlington Hall. So it's all very matter-of-fact. It's travelogue type stuff, but then Stevens starts reminiscing about his time at Darlington Hall with Miss Stevens, and that's where the magic really begins. We see from his recollections, his memories, his self-serving memories, basically, his life is absolutely devoted to his butler service, his subservient nature, to such an extent that it has basically destroyed his life. He's repressed all of his humanity, his feelings behind his work, which he sees as a great calling and a professional thing, that a great aspirational thing to serve as much as he can, but everything has basically gone into his own image of himself as the world's most amazing butler, basically, and he has snide remarks about others who claim similar things, and his basically unreliable memories perhaps basically lead you to see what a sad and broken man he has become, and he's basically absorbed his entire personality into being a servant. And Miss Stevens came into his life several decades ago, and she was kind of like a spark of life in his existence, and they, it appears, had feelings to each other at the time, but it was unrequited, and neither of them could ever quite speak out loud, and he let it go, let it escape, did not act on what feelings he may have had under his outer shell, and she went away and married and started a new life. It seems that in the present day of the book he still has feelings for her, but he will not admit this, but he wants to see her, he wants to meet her again. But meanwhile, we learn the depth of his repression, his subsumation into his work and his life, into his life. There's a very striking, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching scene where his father, who is also in service to the household in his 70s, I think, suffers a medical incident at around the same time as Stevens is being a butler, or is helping serve at a meeting at Darlington Hall between various very important people. And Stevens is forced to the dilemma: does he go help his father, or does he serve the guests at the meeting? And you can guess which he chooses, and you can feel part of him breaking, part of him snapping. There's a terrible scene where he is seen to be, other people point out to him, but he doesn't say it himself, that he is actually crying while he is serving the guests. That is a most skillfully done part of this book. There's like what Stevens is telling you, the surface level of what Stevens is telling you, the very matter-of-fact stuff he's talking about, and there's the hidden subtext and reality which becomes clear. And the other subtext part is Lord Darlington, who he used to work for. In the following years after the First World War, he became very sympathetic to the German cause, and this led to him being something of a pawn for the rising authoritarian and Nazism side of Germany, and he basically became a Nazi sympathiser over the years. And Stevens can't, it seemed, to admit this in his memories, or telling himself even, or telling the story of his past. He will twist himself in knots not to call Lord Darlington what he obviously was, and this has become part of his internalising of whatever repression or whatever has broken him as a man. And it's not outright said, but it becomes clear that what the situation was at Darlington Hall during the years up to the war and past, and the results of all that. Like I said, Ishiguro very skillfully writes all this. It is extraordinary. It will make you feel things. It will. It's just a masterclass in writing and saying one thing and really meaning another. So that is The Remains of the Day. Like I said, if you've only seen the movie, I remember watching the movie on late night television many years ago, and that doesn't give you half the story, really. I mean, it uses the movie ways of saying the same thing, but just to read the text is very superior. So that's Remains of the Day. There are always those books that you hear about, see reviewed or referenced, and see the covers of growing up as a young science fiction fan, but you just never quite get around to reading. And one of those is Waystation by Clifford D. Simak. Published in 1963, it won the 1964 Hugo Award for Best Science Fiction Novel, and it's probably quite well deserved in my opinion. It's a quite simple story which gets more complicated and convoluted as it goes along. It starts off with a tale of Enoch Wallace, a young American man who fought in the Civil War in the 1860s, but mysteriously does not seem to have aged in the century since then. This odd fact about him has run him the eye of the government, who are keeping an eye on him, and his neighbours kind of wonder what's going on, but they kind of like keep it to themselves. So the first chapter is really people talking about him, and then we have government officials talking about watching him. That they have people watching him on his land, wondering what's going on, and then a couple of chapters in, we kind of switch point of views to Enoch himself, and we find out what is really going on. It seems that not long after the Civil War, which was traumatic for him, he came home and encountered an alien which he dubbed Ulysses, kind of humanoid alien, which I think it references looks sort of like a clown, clown in makeup. Offers him a deal that he could become the human custodian of a transfer station, the way station of the title. And of course, this is a very terrible cover. It doesn't really reflect the book at all. So it appears that Galactic Central, a kind of galaxy-wide United Nations, are establishing a network of matter transmitter stations which have a certain range but have to stop and basically retransmit ever so often. And to get to this part of the galaxy, they've decided to establish a transfer station on Earth. And they basically build this into Enoch's house in the countryside in the United States. And as part of the deal, he looks after the station, keeps it secret from the rest of humanity, and he basically never ages as long as he lives in that house. Of course, this must be happening through some type of advanced alien technology. So we find out that Enoch is quite at home with his kind of small-scale life, living this secret life as an interstellar guide to travellers. We learn that he has basically befriended various aliens that kind of reconstitute themselves in his station and then move off to other destinations. They leave him gifts and souvenirs. At one point we learn that he's been collecting woods from various planets, and his friend, who's none the wiser, has been whittling them into statues and so on. Now things start to go wrong for Enoch when, as I mentioned, the government starts to watch him. He befriends a deaf-mute young woman who's a daughter of one of the neighbours. Turns out that her parents are not the best fans of her, and they kind of abuse her, and Enoch kind of takes pity on her, and this leads him into a confrontation with the locals. Also, major events are going on interstellar-wise. There's some type of conflict brewing, and also on Earth there is a brewing conflict as well. A war is perhaps about to happen between the superpowers, which may lead to the destruction of humanity. Enoch also has to face the possibility of losing his status as a way station custodian as things change in the galactic situation. We also learn that there is a religious icon which is revered by various alien races, has gone missing. Now, so this all comes to a head in Enoch's jurisdiction. Previously a alien had died at his way station. He had buried him, and the government agents watching had dug up the body, which is apparently a major faux pas diplomatic incident as far as the aliens are involved. So everything's going wrong for Enoch. He also has using alien technology, created these kind of imaginary friends that he can see. Kind of people from like the Civil War era friends, and even a possible lover he has created for his own amusement, and they kind of rebel against him, and so he loses them as well. So nothing looks good for him. This story sounds convoluted, but it's quite straightforward, and there's a great sense of wonder, just the descriptions of the alien races, Enoch's kind of viewpoint of keeping record of all the transits through the station and so on. I enjoyed it. It does have that kind of classic science fiction thing, and the sense of wonder, like I just said, the exploration of the unknown, and the kind of, there's a very 60s, mid-century type feeling of the kind of impending doom if mankind doesn't fix its issues. And I think one of the alien races decide that a fix for humankind, if they don't sort out their business, is to make everybody on Earth too stupid to use advanced technology and weaponry. Enoch does not want that to happen. He wants mankind to take its place at the table of the Galactic Central. Will that happen? Will mankind destroy itself? What will happen with Lucy, his neighbour? The religious icon, what's the connection there to his way station? All those issues are kind of resolved by the end of the book. I believe this started as serialised in a magazine, and it does show there's some very distinct separate chapters which aren't really part of the main story. There's a kind of a very descriptive chapter which could have, easily have been a 1990s video game or something. It's kind of like a virtual reality shooting range in Enoch's basement, which he uses to hone his shooting skills, which come in handy later in the book, of course. And it's kind of like he fights his way across advanced and alien hordes or something. Like I said, it's like a first-person shooter or something in virtual reality. And it's kind of like just a whole chapter just devoted to this, which doesn't really have much connection to the rest of the story. So it obviously was a separate short story, but it's very modern, very contemporary feeling, that section, and it really works. It's quite evocative all by itself. So anyway, so that's Way Station. I enjoyed it. Very easy to see why it won Best Science Fiction Book in 1964 at the Hugo Awards. Like I said, that's a terrible cover. I've seen lots of old artwork, classic artwork of various covers for this book, and that one that they've chosen for the ebook is probably the worst of them. So, Way Station by Clifford D. Simak. If you're a fan of science fiction and like that old type of stuff, go read it now. Cheers. A couple of months ago now, I read Michael Pollan's latest book, A World Appears, which studies or discusses or ponders what's become known as the hard problem of consciousness. What is consciousness? How do we define it? And where does it come from? And what is its mechanism? Things which apparently are so difficult that pretty much nobody can come up with an answer. And Pollan ends the book by saying maybe there is no one answer and all sorts of stuff like that. And in his references for the book, he mentioned another book which he thought was an idiosyncratic, oblique look at the same issue. And this is the book, Mind-Body Problems by John Horgan. John Horgan is apparently, I had no conscious recollection of it, is a well-known science writer from the US who has written for most of the main US science and factual magazines. Some time ago he decided to start writing his books in a kind of open source way where he would, as he wrote it, he'd post chapters up on a website and gather reaction and so on from the audience, and he'd also add multimedia sections to the website. And once he has finished, you could also order the book as an old-fashioned printed book. So this is what I've done. And it's interesting, as it does discuss and ponder and look at the mind-body consciousness thing like in Pollan's book, but it's a very different book, and it is a different, as Pollan said, this is looking at it at a very different angle. It is really about scientists and thinkers who study the consciousness issue. It's not really about the issue itself, but so Horgan basically interviews, I think it's 9 top thinkers, scientists, whatever you want to call them, who ponder this noodly stuff about consciousness and nature of reality and all that type of thing. And he basically talks to them about how their life has affected the way they look at the consciousness and mind-body issue. Of course, we all like to think scientists are kind of not affected by social, cultural, personal issues and look objectively at all this like some type of soulless robot, and that's the public image of them. This book basically takes a lot of trouble to point out that that is not the case. So basically, as I can't claim, basically Horgan goes and interviews these people and finds that the issues which they faced in their personal life have very much affected how they view the consciousness thing. So we have people who have suffered from serious health issues, the death of loved ones, have found religion, one of them transitioned to a different sex, and so on. And it becomes very clear that all of these issues have very much altered their perception of the consciousness, mind-body thing, to an extent that it's obvious that it is a major influence on them. What am I trying to say? So that is pretty much the book. It's more about the scientists than the science. It's very interesting, and that's pretty much it. It's a one for pondering the nature of life, I suppose. It's not going to change your view on things, I don't think, but I usually kind of balk at these cliched popular science books where they interview wacky scientists, try as a way of looking at a scientific topic. But in this one, the scientists are the topic. So that is Mind-Body Problems by John Horgan. Okay, on with the show. Ursula K. Le Guin was a major voice in science fiction in the latter half of the 20th century, and I'm ashamed to say I haven't read hardly any of her books. I've been trying to rectify that by collecting quite a few of her novels recently. Prior to that, the only one I had read was The Lathe of Heaven, which is apparently one of the most atypical Le Guin books of them all. So recently I read chapter by chapter during lunch breaks at work this book, the 1974 book, The Dispossessed. Now this is the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition cover, which may or may not be very evocative of the actual story. Now it's a complex story which deals with political systems and how human reality collides with political ideals, basically. So it's a bit of a setup which I'll go into, but I won't give you too much of the plot. So it's basically the story of a gentleman called Simak, and there are two planets, or a planet and a moon, both inhabitable. And there's a kind of verdant Earth-type planet called, I think, Eurus, and its moon or companion planet is Aneris. Now, like I said, Eurus is a verdant Earth-type planet, and there are like Earth-type nation states on it. Eris, on the other hand, was mainly a mining colony of the nations on Eurus up until a certain period, and that was when about, I think, 160 years before the present day of the book, a popular uprising occurred on one of the capitalist-type nation states on Eurus, and to stop things getting out of hand, the government there gave the agitators, the Odonians, the basically option to travel to Aneris and set up their own world, basically, under their rules. So they took that offer, and now 165 years later, the first person from Aneris is going back to Eurus as a visitor, and that person is Simak. So books start kind of midstream as Simak is getting on a Uneris shuttle to fly back to the planet for the first time a visitor since the revolution, and we find that he is being protested against. The people are throwing stones at him and calling him a traitor. So then the book kind of splits into two story threads. One is like a flashback which tells Simak's story, his upbringing, his family, his friends, how he developed as a man, and the present day story on Eurus, as Simak visits the major developed areas of Eurus, which is the nation state of Alo, I believe. There are several states on Eurus, and Alo is like kind of a Western capitalist one. So Simak, we find out, is a scientist. He has advanced theoretical knowledge of things which seem amazing to others. He's had a hard life. We follow his upbringing. Turns out that Aneris is barely habitable at most of the time. It's a kind of desert world with very few crops and life forms, native life forms or wildlife. The humans which travelled there after the revolution have kind of had a hard scrabble life. And there are famines and all sorts of things. And their revolution installed a kind of utopian, to them anyway, kind of anarcho-socialist system where there's no central government and various collectives organise everything for people. They are given jobs, they're given housing, they are told where to go, where to live, and anyone who stands up as an individual is kind of denounced as an egotist and all sorts of things. But they see this as more a fantastic and enlightened system, and they kind of revile the capitalist nation of Alo, where they originated from, and the whole planet of Eurus is seen as some type of dirty, horrible, scummy thing which they don't want to be too involved with. So hence at the start, the spaceport which took Shivik to Eurus is kind of fenced off from the west of Anaris, and no one's allowed there because they don't want it to pollute their perfect civilization. So Shivik in the present day thread basically is a fated visitor to Eurus. His scientific ideas are celebrated. He's shown around all the technological advancements of Eurus. They have spacecraft and airships and all the advanced type Western technological things. Meanwhile, in the flashback, we find out that all is not perfect in the workers' paradise of Anaris. There's all sorts of hierarchies which have developed in systems like science, which Shivik is involved in, and all sorts of things. To the extreme that some people have been committed to insane asylums for speaking out against how things are. Likewise, Eurus is upfront a advanced technological civilization, but it's based on a kind of misogynistic, patriarchal society in which women are kept down and don't have an official voice. There's kind of an authoritarian bent to their government. And while Shivik is visiting, a war breaks out in one of the neighbouring nation states, and the state of Alo, which he's visiting, kind of intervenes, and another state on Eurus is a socialist state apparently, and there's kind of like a proxy war going on between Alo and the other state in a third party state, and this kind of ferments a kind of unrest within Alo, which Shivik is visiting. Now he gets a bit sick of his gilded cage on Eurus and in Alo, and he kind of seeks the real situation there. A servant which is being tasked with serving him and gives him contacts in the underworld. And Shivik kind of goes rogue and eventually gets involved in demonstrations which go violent, and the government of Alo cracks down on its people. So Shivik sees them as they really are. But the main point is, are they any better in the end than Anaris? Both systems are imperfect. They have high ideals about what they can achieve and what they should achieve, but it all, like I said earlier, it collides with human nature and human reality. And I think that is Le Guin's main point of this book. We can have high ideals, but humans are always the same. And it's worth thinking about when this book was written. It was in the tail end of the counterculture of the 60s, early 70s, when everyone was young people were wanting to change things, a revolution. They had all sorts of high-minded ideals about what would change if we only abolished governments or did this or did that. And what Le Guin is kind of pointing out here, that as long as human nature stays the same, none of these perfect systems or ideals are going to work out great in the end, unless we are willing to compromise or willing to alter our ideals to suit reality. And basically we also find that Shivik's real reason for going to Eurus was his advanced technological thinking. It's kind of like an allegory to like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had advanced mathematicians and theoretical physics, but they didn't have the industrial base to bring that into real products or developments, not often anyway, as often as the Western industrialized nations. And so Eurus basically wanted his knowledge to create faster than light communications and starships and what have you. In the end, after the riot and demonstration, we see Shivik go to the diplomatic representation of the the equivalent of like the United Nations, because there's several alien races which are really part of a human diaspora which spread out among the stars after some cataclysm on Earth sometime before. And this is apparently all connected to Le Guin's Hainish cycle, which are several books which involve these various races which are scattered around the galaxy, all originating from humankind. And it appears that Shivik's invention of faster-than-light communications and its applications for space travel, etc., is used in some of the other Hainish cycle books which take place chronologically later. So this is kind of like the originator of the technology used in the later books, and Shivik is the kind of idealistic gentleman who brought it all about. So anyway, it's enjoyable, it's very mind-expanding, thought-provoking. Le Guin is quite a master at creating seemingly simple stories which tell complicated issues and put them in your mind, and what if, why, how, why, what is going to happen if this happens. Shivik himself goes through the ringer. His ideals are tested, his morals are tested, and in the end we see him on a Hainish ship heading back to his home planet of Aneras. Will the people there welcome him, or will they kill him? He's not sure. So that's how it ends. It won a lot of the awards the year it was published, or after the year it was published. The Hugo, the Nebula, I think even Locus magazine gave it its top award. Rightfully so. It's a very thought-provoking, and it was probably at the time more timely look at political systems and reality and idealism. It still reads very contemporary today. I mean, a lot of these issues have not gone away. There are some quite dramatic, quite striking scenes. There's some quiet, subtle moments which will make you think as well. So that is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, as I try and get the cover up again. Like I said, this is the latter-day Sci-Fi Masterworks edition. Other versions are available, some with probably better cover pictures which represent the story. So that is The Dispossessed. Okay, on with the show. Over the years I have picked up several books by the UK author Francis Spufford, and I am ashamed to say I've never actually opened the cover or read it. I have several paper books and several ebooks by him. There's the précis of the books, the descriptions, the blurbs, and they always seem to fascinate me about what he writes about. But until now, I've never actually read one, and that has changed now with this book, Nonesuch by Francis Spufford. Finished reading this a week or two ago. It is long, it's chunky, and it is quite good. It is a kind of semi-fantasy, semi-science fiction historical novel, if that makes any sense. So it's set in initially before the outbreak of World War II, and it follows a young woman called Iris Hawkins who is trying to make her way in the world in the years before the cataclysm came and shook the world. And she is working in, I think, a financial brokerage firm, manning a teletype machine. And on her time off, she goes out and tries to basically blow off steam by dancing and partying and what have you. And during this, she meets a gentleman called Geoffrey Hale, I believe his name, who's some type of engineer working on the nascent television industry in the UK before the Second World War, like I said, that did exist. They were just ramping up broadcasts and what have you when that happened. And Jeff is a TV engineer, and one thing happens after another, and they end up in bed together. And following that, she has some strange experiences with a otherworldly entity which seems to be pursuing her, chasing her. The creature, which has a unique description, which I won't ruin here. And eventually, along with Jeff and his father, she discovers how to stop this thing. And this kind of opens a new world for both of them. And it turns out that Jeff's father is a kind of adept of a secret society which used to meet in the 1920s. All talk about esoteric and occult type stuff. And basically, angels, not quite as biblically accurate or what have you, exist in this reality and have been enslaved by adept practitioners in history, and the angel decide to, one of them at least, decide to let Jeff and Iris know that something bad is about to happen to their reality, and it turns out that, to put it simply, evil fascists are trying to change history so England doesn't have a chance of winning the war. That's basically it. And one of the big baddies of the book is a young woman called Lal, who is a very nasty fascist sympathiser and is kind of almost like a personal rival to Iris as well. She met her in one of the initial scenes at the party or whatever, and she's kind of like an ice princess, and we keep bumping into her during the book in her various guises, and she's a nasty piece of work, and soon becomes clear that there is kind of like a race going on between Iris and Lowell to who will unlock the secret of changing history first, and Iris basically has to get there first and stop Lowell from doing that. And it involves all sorts of mystical things like multi-dimensional portals which are kind of strung up between statues in London, statues which imprison angels. And if the bad guys can get through this network of statues to the other end, they will be able to change history. And that's pretty much it. And it is very long. It's very long. I thought it was probably a third longer than it needed to be for the amount it covers, but we get a lot of internalising from Iris about her feelings about her relationship with Jeff and the war, and she works in a financial brokerage, and we get a lot of her pondering the ups and downs of the financial markets during the outbreak of war, and it becomes clear she is quite a genius at this type of thing. But in the world of the 1930s, 1940s, women are not allowed to basically hold positions of power or influence in these companies, so she has to use coercion and whatever to eventually get her way and set herself up for success. So that is basically the plot of Nonesuch. It's very enjoyable. It's a nice way to pass the time of day reading something slightly different. It's kind of, it's historical with a fantastical edge. The otherworldly creatures, like I said, the first one that chases them, and the angels when they're in their true form, very spectacularly done, very well done. And there's kind of like a scientific, almost scientific explanation to the way they materialise and appear. And Jeff, being a engineer, kind of works out frequencies and whatever that they're operating on. So there's a slightly science fiction type edge to the mystical stuff. So that's worth your time. The only thing I've got to warn you is right at the end it appears that there's going to be at least one more volume in the series. I was hoping after all this that the story would be wrapped up with a satisfactory conclusion. I don't think it's spoiling too much to say that there's a major reverse towards the end of the book, and that's going to have to be fixed in another volume, apparently. So that is Nonesuch by Francis Spufford. Okay, on we go. Okay, we come to this book, The Valley by Emanuel. And here he goes, looking all suave in the back cover. Now, Emanuel is a lawyer by trade, and this is his first book. And as I speak, this is one of the best-selling books in New Zealand at the moment. They've done a wonderful job of selling this by going on podcasts and the media, but there's been quite a word of mouth and an excellent review of this book. And this book is basically pretty much a year in the life of a public defence lawyer in the region of the Hutt Valley, the Valley of the Title, which is a kind of like a dormitory suburbs north of the capital of New Zealand, Wellington, where everyone basically goes to sleep and then they commute back into Wellington for their day jobs. But there's a lot more to that. There's a semi-industrialised area and their entire communities and small towns and regions and what have you up there. And it also has one of the large crime rates apparently, and the court there has has a certain reputation, and that's why Emanuel chose to base his book there. Now, it is basically, like I said, the year in the life of Public Defence Service lawyer Lewis Skerritt, who's basically like the main character, the main driving force, and it is a non-fiction book, so I better point out anyway. It is basically a reportage of basically his cases over the year period involving two of his clients, a gentleman called Nathan and another gentleman called Ricky Hana. And they are very similar in some ways and very different in some ways. One of them is a Maori gentleman, one is a Pakeha or European, New Zealand European. They're very troubled men who basically haven't really grown up, and their life basically is a life of crime and infringing on the rules and basically, but as it goes on in this book, it says that the biggest person that they are harming basically is themselves. They're both substance abusers, and this has kind of ruined their lives. So and the most frustrating thing as a reader at this book is as we go through their cases and the trials and what have you, they just can't stop offending. I mean, they get chances after chances, and the only thing they have to do is basically not offend, but of course the substance abuse, and basically their lives, basically the propensity to commit crime to go on, and they don't have the kind of limits that like what we would call an ordinary average person, if there's such a thing. It is very eye-opening. There is a lot of black humour, gallows humour amongst the lawyers, amongst the criminal fraternity, amongst the court. There's a lot of courtroom scenes and judges making very wry and observant comments about the situations. There's a lot more humour in it than you might expect a book about kind of petty criminals in New Zealand. Emanuel basically wants to open up the New Zealand society's eyes to the justice system, how it really works, and the problems with it. There are a couple of epilogues he writes after the main text. One of them is his thoughts on the justice system and where it's going wrong, where it's going right. He does make some very pointed comments in there about governments messing with the justice system. One will change something, another one will change it back. And he makes even further pointed comments towards the media. The media's go-to thing to get eyeballs and readers and viewers is to hype up crime. And he points out that crime has been basically receding, crime rates are dropping in the Western world for the last 40 years, but still the media makes it the number one story, the scare story to scare public into it, and this has developed into a symbiotic relationship with politicians. Particularly around election times, the media will pump scare stories, the politicians will say, we'll fix this, we'll be tough on crime, and then they come in and reverse some previous liberalising of the justice system or reform of the justice system. They'll switch it around to see it as tougher and harder on crime, and this goes on forever. The New Zealand governments come in, they try to reform the justice system into something more effective like they see in Western Europe perhaps, and then the next government will come in and say, oh no, we just need to lock up more and more people, and on it goes. And the other pointed thing he points out is getting rid of people out of the mental health system in the 80s and 90s. Basically, the equivalent number of people moved out of that system have basically shown up in the justice system, the criminal system, and the prison population. And that is a major point of this book. The main characters involved, Nathan and Ricky Hana, among others, all have serious mental health issues along with their criminal offending, perhaps leading into their criminal offending, and health issues, both physically and mental, and basically what deep-seated issues with their family and upbringing is which have never been addressed because they've been moved around from place to place to place. And obviously, in an earlier time, they may have been institutionalised for good or for worse, but these days they end up in the criminal justice system and in prisons, and it just repeats on and on. So Emanuel wants to point this out to us. Everyone seems to cast a blind eye to this reality, basically, as long as the people are seen to be thrown in jail for transgressing or whatever. It's very interesting. The epilogues are kind of like a little bonus to the main text. And the second epilogue is about Emanuel's journalistic efforts to make this book fair and balanced, and Harry involved himself in the lives of the subjects and maybe overstepped a few times by helping them or not helping them. It's a very interesting couple of articles towards the end of the book after the main text. The main text is very eye-opening. Like I said, it sounds wrong to say it's entertaining, but it's very entertaining. You go along. It's very much an attempt to do like a New Zealand version of something like Homicide, a Life on the Streets, or whatever that David Simon did in the 1990s, which kind of did that kind of reportage thing on detectives in a US city. This is kind of like a similar thing in little old New Zealand about the legal system really and the characters involved. And it's more lively, it's more alive and entertaining. And there's a certain something about seeing society that you're part of, that you recognise the kind of darker side of the shadowy side of it maybe, or just the part that you don't see because you don't go to these court cases, you don't break the law on a regular basis, you don't need a lawyer to represent you all the time. But if you did, this is a very eye-opening expose on the system and how it does and doesn't work, and mainly doesn't work as the case may be. So that is The Valley by Emanuel. Very excellent stuff. All right, on with the show. Okay, here we are on Monday night, and there's some more reviews to do for this Bumper Omnibus review video that I'm trying to stitch together here. Okay, just today I finished this book. I've been reading it on the Kindle at work during lunch times, and it is on the calculation of volume part 1 or book 1 by, let me try and pronounce this, Solvej Balle, a Danish author. Now this series of books has recently been translated to English over the last couple of years. I believe there are around 6 in all so far. They've been a good bestseller in Europe, and it's, like I said, just recently been translated to English, and I think 5 or 6 of them are available in English now. Now what is it about? It is pretty much your typical stuck in a time loop type story. Well, the initial setup is, so it's about a woman living in France who is a rare book antiquity object type dealer along with her husband. They're in business, live in a small town in France. One day she goes to Paris on a business trip. She visits like an antiquities fair, picks up some books which her customers have requested from some bookshops, visits another dealer and meets his new girlfriend, goes about her way, goes back to the hotel to sleep, wakes up the next morning and discovers it's the previous day again. And basically there's the growing horror that her days are repeating. She can never get past November the 18th of the year that the book is set, which has not been disclosed so far in the text, but it seems to be pretty much contemporary of our times. And yeah, that's the book. Basically, like I said, it's part 1 of 6 so far published. I enjoyed it. The book starts with a rush. She tells us that it's 100 and something 21st or something, November the 18th, and from where she starts the text from, and she recounts her situation, how she got into it, and then the book basically kind of changes a little bit partway through. It becomes really a study, a meditation on her reaction, her experience of having to live the same day again, and she goes through various phases. At one point she sees herself as some type of a monster eating up the world. The book kind of changes a little bit further on to be like diary entries. In this book it goes up to day 365. So that's basically she's lived November the 18th for an entire year. Like I said, it's a concept, it's a kind of setup that's been done many times in fiction, science fiction, written word, movies. There are some famous movies, i.e. Groundhog Day, etc., which use the same kind of setup, and it's been done in many episodes of science fiction TV series. It's been done many times. There's many great episodes and shows like Stargate and Star Trek: The Next Generation and so on, which use this basis premise, the time loop. And like those stories, I was kind of expecting, even though I knew it's a 6-book series so far, I was kind of hoping for some type of clue to why this happened, how she was going to get out of it. But she doesn't really get that in this first volume, and it kind of leads to a very different feeling time loop story, one that's unresolved, which is something very different. It kind of, your preconception of these type of stories want it to be tied up and fixed and solved, and the prisoner of time released by the end of it, but none of that happens in this first book. At least she is desperately seeking for some type of sign of a difference, a change. She kind of haunts the November 18th world, of her little world. She travels back to Paris several times. She kind of hides in her own house away from her own husband, because on that day he thinks that she is in Paris still. Then she decides to make contact with him, and they kind of live a kind of day at a time. Or to her anyway, she tells her husband what's going on. Sometimes he believes her, and they kind of experiment with what's happening. And there's all this odd inconsistency, like they can eat certain foods and they will be depleted from their stockpiles even on the following day in the loop. But other things disappear overnight. At a certain point in nighttime, objects are replenished back to where they originally were the previous November 18th, but other things are consumed. And this hasn't been explained yet, but it is an intriguing part of the story. And basically, the book kind of sags in the middle because it becomes basically her going slightly insane, bonkers, trying to deal with the situation of living the same day over and over. Unfortunately, to me, the reader, it felt like I was living the same day over and over for a while there. The book did drag a lot, I felt, in the midsection. Then things kind of pick up again, where she kind of tries to expand her world of November the 18th, and she does start to notice some inconsistency, and then on the 365th day, something happens. Doesn't actually point to resolution, but it points to something. And I understand volume 2, which is kind of trailed at the end of the first volume, she tries to change her experience by travelling to different geographical locations during the same day, and all that entails. I'm hoping there's a resolution to this series. 6 volumes is quite a massive investment for the reader. I guess it's a new type of time loop story, which you go along for the ride and have to experience things along with the person stuck in the loop. So I enjoyed it. It's not light-hearted, really. It's serious. It's a serious, like, meditation on what it's like to be in that situation. It's written in that kind of crisp, clear, Nordic type prose, like you might have experienced in Scandi horror, not horror, crime books, that type of thing. It's, the way it's translated into that kind of descriptive text, which reminds one of things like cyberpunk, science fiction, and so on. It's very similar type of all the brands are mentioned, all the activities are described in detail, all the day-to-day activities are in minute detail. So that is on the calculation of volume book 1 or volume 1 or part 1 by, let me try this again, Solvej, Balle. Okay,